The formation wavered. Hold! Alfonso's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Lock shields! Hold the line! The Christian infantry pressed together, shields overlapping until they formed a wooden wall bristling with spears. The arrow storm continued, but the line held. Men died standing upright, held in place by the pressure of their brothers pressing close. This was medieval warfare at its most brutal, no retreat, no escape, only endurance. Then came the response. Des Volt! The roar exploded from 70,000 throats simultaneously. Trumpets screamed their brazen challenge. Knights lowered lances in perfect unison, sunlight flashing off steel tips like a forest of deadly stars. The ground shook, and then the Christian cavalry charged. The collision was cataclysmic, the sound of worlds ending and beginning in the same terrible instant. Steel against flesh, faith against fury, destiny against destiny. The front ranks of both armies simply vanished into a storm of dust, blood, and screaming chaos. Pedro II of Aragon led his knights up the left flank like a spear thrust into soft flesh. His Catalan warriors crashed into the Almohad cavalry with such force that horses and men tumbled together in a mass of broken bones and rent metal. Lances, shattered on impact, transformed instantly into clubs that crushed skulls and ribs. The ground churned into bloody mud beneath thousands of hooves and boots. In the center, Alfonso fought like a man possessed by righteous fury. This was his redemption, his answer to Alarcos, his chance to prove that God had never abandoned Christian Spain. Arrows struck his shield, he felt the impacts like hammer blows. Swords glanced off his armor, leaving bright scratches on steel. An Almohad warrior lunged at him with a curved blade. Alfonso's sword took the man's arm at the elbow in a spray of arterial blood. Another attacker fell with Alfonso's blade through his throat. The king was surrounded, engulfed in a swirl of enemies, and for one terrible heartbeat it seemed he would fall just as victory seemed possible. Then a group of Navarrese knights smashed through the Almohad line like an axe splitting wood, their leader roaring orders in mountain dialect. They surrounded Alfonso, creating a wall of steel that drove the enemy back. The king gasped for breath, tasted blood in his mouth, his own or his enemy's. He couldn't tell and didn't care. He raised his sword again and pushed forward. Al-Nasir watched from his elevated position, and for the first time, his composure cracked. These Christians were supposed to break, to scatter like sheep before wolves. Instead, they fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness. He sent wave after wave forward cavalry from Morocco, Berber infantry, mercenaries from as far as Egypt. Each wave crashed against the Christian line and was absorbed or thrown back. The valley transformed into a vision of hell. Dust and smoke rose in choking clouds that turned day into twilight. The screams of wounded men and dying horses created a cacophony that drowned out individual voices. The air itself became thick with blood mist, making every breath taste of iron and death. By midday, the temperature was unbearable. Men fought in full armor under a sun that turned metal into torture devices. Warriors collapsed from heat exhaustion as often as from wounds, their bodies simply surrendering to conditions no human was meant to endure. Tens of thousands lay dead or dying on the field. Medics moved through the carnage, trying to drag wounded to safety, but there was no safety. The entire valley had become a killing ground. And still the battle raged, neither side willing to yield. The Muslims fought for their empire, their faith, their honor. The Christians fought for survival and the future of their children. But then, through the smoke and chaos, Christian commanders spotted it, the golden pavilion of the Caliph himself, still pristine and untouched, surrounded by that legendary formation, the Black Guard. These elite warriors stood in ranks 3 deep, each man physically chained at the waist to his brothers on either side. They formed a living fortress of flesh, iron, and unbreakable will. Chroniclers would later claim 10,000 men comprised this guard, though more realistic estimates suggest perhaps 2,000, still an overwhelming force bound together literally and symbolically. For hours, Christian knights had thrown themselves at this formation. Each charge ended the same way. Horses impaled on the thicket of spears, riders dragged from saddles and butchered by the chained warriors who could neither flee nor be scattered. The formation held like a castle wall. Men died by the hundreds trying to breach it, their bodies piling up before the chains like offerings at some dark altar. The word began spreading through Christian ranks, a whisper that grew into desperate certainty. If we break those chains, we break their empire. The Caliph stands behind that wall. Reach him, and the battle ends. But how do you break an unbreakable defense? How do you shatter iron chains that held together with fanatical courage? The answer came from the north, announced by the blast of war horns that cut through the battle's roar like trumpets announcing the apocalypse. From the right flank came the banners of Navarre white fields, emblazoned with crimson lions that seemed to roar in the wind. At their head rode King Sancho VII el Fuerte, and now his reputation would be tested against legend. He was a giant, taller than any man on the field, his sword broad enough to cleave through horse and rider in a single stroke. Sunlight struck his armor and transformed him into a moving tower of flame. He raised that massive blade, and his voice, deep as thunder, rolling through mountain valleys, carried across the battlefield. "Navarre! With me to the tent! For God and Spain!" The cry rippled through his warriors like fire, through dry grass. Men who could barely stand found strength they didn't know remained. The Navarrese knights formed up heavy cavalry from the Pyrenees Mountains, their war horses bred for endurance and power, their riders trained in mountain warfare where every fight was brutal and close. These weren't courtly knights seeking glory. These were killers forged in the hardest warfare Europe knew. Sancho pointed his sword toward the golden pavilion and the chained guards surrounding it. "There lies the heart of the beast," he roared. "Break it, and Spain lives forever, with me!" War trumpets answered, and then the earth began to move. The charge of Navarre wasn't a cavalry charge, it was a natural disaster given form. The ground split under the thunder of hooves. A wall of iron and faith and mountain fury roared forward, trampling everything in its path. Dust exploded skyward as though the earth itself was erupting. The Navarrese crashed through wounded warriors in broken formations from both sides, their momentum unstoppable. The first line of the Black Guard lowered their spears in perfect unison, a forest of iron points designed to impale any charge. The two forces collided with the force of collapsing mountains. The sound, metal on metal, chains rattling, men screaming, bones shattering, created a noise that seemed to tear reality itself. Warriors in the Black Guard began falling, but the chains held them upright, even in death, creating a macabre wall of corpses still linked together. King Sancho fought like a legend come to life. His massive sword swung down upon the chains, with such force that sparks exploded like lightning strikes. The first chain link burst apart, then another. Each blow rang out like a bell tolling doom. His warhorse reared, and its steel-shod hooves struck the chains with crushing impacts. Men hacked at the iron links with axes, swords, anything with an edge. Blood and sweat made weapons slippery, but desperation gave strength beyond normal human limits. "Break the chains!" someone screamed, and the cry became a prayer, a mantra, a command from heaven itself. Break the chains! Break the chains! Warriors who had nothing left, whose arms trembled with exhaustion, whose vision blurred with blood and sweat, found one final surge of strength. They threw themselves at the chains with suicidal fury. And then, like a dam finally succumbing to floodwaters, the chains broke. The metallic screech of iron shattering echoed across the valley like the death cry of an empire. The Black Guard, that legendary unbreakable formation, collapsed. Warriors tumbled forward or backward, no longer held in formation by the iron links. The Christians surged through the breach like floodwaters, through a broken levee, a wave of steel and vengeance and holy fury that nothing could stop. They reached the golden pavilion. Hands seized the massive crescent banner, the symbol of Almohad power that had flown victorious over 100 battlefields, and tore it from its pole. The banner fell, and warriors trampled it into the blood-soaked earth until the golden threads were indistinguishable from mud and gore. The sight of that falling banner was visible across the entire battlefield. And everything changed in that instant. From his position across the valley, Alfonso VIII saw the crescent banner fall. Time seemed to stop. The roar of battle faded in his ears. For one perfect crystalline moment, he understood that God had answered his prayers not at Alarcos, but here, now, 17 years later. Redemption had come. He lifted his sword high and his voice raw, cracking, filled with 17 years of pain and hope, roared across the battlefield. For Ward, for God, and Castile. The entire Christian army answered with a sound like the earth itself crying out in triumph. Every warrior who could still stand, still lift a weapon, still draw a breath, they all surged forward as one unified force. The Almohad lines, already wavering, now shattered completely. Panic spread faster than any blade could kill. Warriors threw down their weapons and fled. Officers tried desperately to restore order, but order was impossible. The sight of their caliph's banner in the dirt, the Black Guard destroyed, the chains broken, it was too much. Their world was ending before their eyes. Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir fled. Surrounded by the handful of guards who remained loyal, he abandoned the Golden Pavilion and rode desperately toward the south. Behind him, his army dissolved into chaos. Thousands died in the pursuit. Thousands more were captured. The valley that had echoed with disciplined war drums now rang only with the screams of the defeated and the victory cries of the triumphant. When the fighting finally slowed as evening approached, the battlefield was unrecognizable. The grass was gone, replaced by a carpet of bodies and broken weapons. Rivers of blood had carved channels through the earth, the air hung thick with smoke and the copper stench of slaughter. King Sancho VII rode slowly through the ruins of the Black Guard, his armor dented and blood-splattered but intact. His horse stepped carefully over twisted chains and dead warriors. He stopped before the destroyed Golden Pavilion and looked at the crimson horizon where the sun was setting, like the eye of God himself watching this day of judgment. Sancho whispered words that would be recorded in chronicles. "The chains are broken." At that moment, the last light struck his armor, and he seemed to glow like an angel of war. From that fire, Spain would be reborn. Evening settled over Las Navas de Tolosa like a blanket drawn over the dead. Smoke rose into a sky painted blood red by the dying sun. The wind carried scents of ash, sweat, blood, and something else, the strange metallic smell that always follows massive slaughter. The valley that had thundered with war now lay silent except for the moans of the wounded and the whispered prayers of the living. Thousands lay where they had fallen, their final moments frozen on their faces. Some had died with prayers on their lips, others with curses, some with expressions of surprise, as though shocked to discover death was real. Priests and medics moved through the carnage, offering what comfort they could, a sip of water for the dying, a prayer for the dead, a bandage for those who might survive to see another dawn. King Alfonso VIII dismounted and walked across the battlefield, each step heavy with the weight of what had been purchased here. He had won, but victory tasted of ashes and blood. He found King Sancho beside the ruins of the Golden Pavilion, surrounded by the broken chains of the Black Guard. Sancho looked up, his eyes hollow yet burning with something words couldn't capture. Alfonso nodded. No words were necessary between them. Both understood what this day meant, not just for them, but for every generation that would follow. Nearby, priests sang low hymns over the fallen, their voices rising into the darkening sky. The sound spread across the valley, a lament and a promise woven together. From that day forward, the chains captured at Las Navas de Tolosa would hang in cathedrals across Spain, eternal symbols of faith that had broken tyranny's grip. Do you understand what that means? Physical chains, preserved for centuries, reminding every generation that impossible victories are possible when divided kingdoms finally unite. Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir fled to Morocco and never returned to Iberia. The psychological wound of Las Navas destroyed him as surely as any blade. He died less than a year later, some say of shame. His mighty empire began crumbling within a decade, fragmenting into squabbling successor states that could never again threaten Christian Spain with united force. The balance of power in Iberia had shifted permanently. The roads to Córdoba, Seville, and Granada now lay open before the Christian kingdoms. The Reconquista, the centuries-long campaign to reclaim Iberia from Muslim rule, found its heartbeat at Las Navas de Tolosa. When Granada finally fell in 1492, exactly 280 years later, and the last crescent banner was lowered from the Alhambra's towers, chroniclers wrote, "It began on a summer's day when the chains of the Caliph broke and 3 kings stood as one. The wind swept across the valley one final time that evening, scattering dust over broken shields and shattered dreams. And in that fading light, witnesses claimed that if you listened closely enough, you could still hear the echo of their cry rolling across the centuries. Deus vult. God wills it. From faith and fire, a new Spain had been born. Now you've witnessed one of history's most pivotal battles, the day impossible unity achieved impossible victory and changed the destiny of an entire civilization. If stories like this ignite your imagination, if you want to explore more battles where courage rewrote the future and ordinary warriors became legends, then you need to subscribe to Flow of History right now. We bring you deep into the medieval world's most dramatic moments,